All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Med Mentor Monday. Today's topic is when things don't go as planned, med school app edition. So today we have some awesome panelists who are all current medical students at DGSOM, and we'll be talking about how to deal with rejections, wait lists, how to plan your next steps for this unexpected gap year, and just how to make a great comeback when you start to reapply to med school. So thanks for coming. Med Mentors, we're just a group of DGSOM students that started this org in 2020. So if you don't know about us, we're pretty new, and we offer a lot of peer advising, free resources for pre-meds, whether you're at UCLA or at any other institution. So definitely check out those resources. But yeah, we'll just get started with a little bit of an introduction. So if everyone could just go around, say your name, your year in medical school, maybe where you're from, and also where you went to undergrad. That would be great. So we'll just get started. Norman, you want to go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my name is Norman. I'm a current MS1 in the MD PhD program. I did my undergraduate work at UCLA, and I'm also originally from the Los Angeles area. And in between med school and undergrad, I spent 3 years doing research and applied twice.
Thank you. And Anna, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Anna. I am in MS4. I'm a new MS4 though, so I have not yet applied to residency or matched. Our year starts really early. I will be doing that this time next year. And I went to Berkeley for undergrad. I graduated in 2018. I took a gap year and then came up here for med school. So that's how things are going.
Awesome. Bennett, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Bennett. I'm a first-year medical student along with Norman and George over here. I'm originally from Northern California, so like South Bay area. And then I went to undergrad actually with Julia at Emory. We were classmates. And then in the meantime, did 2 years of research in Boston.
Awesome. George.
Hey guys, I'm George. Also first year with Norman and Bennett. Also in the MD PhD program with Norman. I was born and raised in the SoCal area, Pasadena area. Went undergrad at Caltech and then took a year off to do research. Yeah, looking forward to today's discussion.
Awesome. And I'm Julia. I'm a third year MD PhD student, 3 years out of 8 years. And I'm just doing the research years from Kentucky. I went to Emory. But I will not be the one talking today. We're going to get started with some questions for the panelists. So the first topic we wanted to address is being on the wait list. If there's anyone in the current application cycle that is still holding wait lists or, kind of been ghosted by schools and you don't know what to do at this point, I just want to ask the panelists, like, what did you do in that situation? And, how can students remain in contact with the school and express interest? And kind of how long do you wait on a wait list until you kind of accept that maybe it's not going to happen this time? So if anyone could just address any issue related to the wait list, that would be awesome.
I can hop in and go first. If I think that my opinion would be that if you are like holding a waitlist position, it's not like a bad thing to reach out to that school. I would say like you want to toe the line between not reaching out too often. I think that can definitely be kind of a red flag to different schools if you're a little bit too persistent in reaching out. But I think reaching out is a great first step to like let that school know that you are still interested, that you would make a great fit for that program. Like these are the reasons why. I think you could call it almost like a letter of intent or like a letter of interest is a better word because you're not like intending to go to that one program. You can keep it more broad, but just letting them know that you are very, very interested in attending that school. These are the reasons why you'd be a great fit. I think can be a really compelling reason for a school to pull you up on that wait list, especially if they have like a really long wait list. They haven't heard from a lot of people. So I think that's like a really good idea to do if you still are on the wait list. I would say if you've already reached out to them before this point, maybe reaching out like one more time is okay. I wouldn't quite go past 2 times depending on the situation, but reaching out at least once, like make it genuine, make it meaningful. It's not going to hurt you. It's only going to help you. And like, what do you have to lose at this point? And so put some effort in, like write like a nice letter. And I think it really can push people up in the end. But that's just my take. I'm not sure if anyone else has other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with pretty much everything you said, Anna. I think in my situation, I was on a wait list for actually an MD PhD program, and I kind of had to do a lot of like soul searching of whether I really wanted to wait on that wait list for MD PhD program, or in my case, it was luckily already accepted to an MD program. So I was kind of like deciding, what do I do here? Do I really want to wait and see if I want to do an MD PhD really bad, or do I want to just do an MD program and what to do there? And so I think, being on a wait list is not a comfortable place to be. I understand that it's not fun. And there's a lot of like, really good soul searching you have to do. I know some people like making like pros and cons lists or talking to just lots of people to kind of get their opinions on what's going on. I think ultimately just thinking about, is that school somewhere you really want to go and really want to be happy, or you see yourself being happy there? And if you are thinking about deciding to take a year or two and reapply, while you're on the wait list, maybe even start thinking about what kind of things you maybe would want to do if you were to take a year or two, just so that like, in the case where you end up not getting, if hopefully you do get in, but if you don't, you're not like surprised and you kind of have some idea of what you might want to do in that next year. I'm just kind of thinking practically, but yeah, I think overall, it's just acknowledging that it's not a fun place to be, and just really taking some good hard thought about, is that, is it worth it for you to stick it out and wait, or do you have some idea of something else you might want to do, or if you have other options, as well. Just kind of weigh those.
I really like those those ideas and approaches. I think, yeah, it's a good time to reflect and see if that's something worth pursuing, or if it's better to reapply. I think another thing is, and I'd love to get the other panelists' thoughts on this as well. But like, I think if you're close with your prof or someone, you can potentially, I don't know if it's possible to have them call in for you or vouch for you to the admission committee. But I think, again, being mindful of whether or not admission committees have opened that door for students to reach out to them. I know certain schools have, I won't name drop, but there's certain schools that absolutely refuse to get any additional information from students after you submit your primaries and secondaries. So just being mindful of that when you reach out to these schools, because yeah, as was mentioned, you want to be careful of not overwhelming the school and appearing desperate, but also kind of being proactive and showing interest in the program.
That's such a good point, George. Thanks for bringing that up. Like, if a school says, please do not send us anything, then definitely don't send anything. Yeah, that's a really good thing to keep in mind.
I also think there's I guess something important to mention about waitlists, because we may have people listening who applied this cycle and didn't get accepted anywhere and only have waitlists. And so they're kind of holding out. I mean, I know of a friend of mine who got off the waitlist in June for her medical school, and it was a terrible time waiting, and there's no guarantees, but there's kind of different approaches for whether or not you're in that situation, or if you're earlier in your cycle getting waitlisted, or even getting waitlisted, before or after an interview is different. You can kind of, I don't know, you have different ways to leverage yourself depending on where you are in the application. And unfortunately, I feel like your chances decrease as the later it gets. But I guess related to that, what are some things that people can be thinking of if they are in that situation where, you know, the only option they have is they're holding on for a wait list for one school, say, and it's this cycle, you know, what should they be doing now? Should be to think about that plan B just in case it doesn't work out?
So I'm happy to take this question because I was in that exact same situation like 2 years ago. So my first round of applications, I applied to MD only programs, you know, thinking that I would just do like clinical work and like some research on the side, but research was sort of more tangential to me. And I like applied like far and wide. I got like 2 interviews. One school rejected me like immediately within 2 days after the interview. And the other school, which like waitlisted me. And so I was like holding out for this one waitlist spot. And eventually, you know, they told me I was waitlisted in March. And so, you know, April, May, June, I'm just sort of like, you know, dragging my feet. Like, what do I do? Is this going to come through? Is this not going to come through? And, you know, after I did some like soul searching and talked with people, and they're like, you know, one of the reasons that I probably didn't get more interviews was because my application read as being sort of too research heavy. And so I was encouraged to reapply as MD PhD, you know, which I did. And then that school that I was waitlisted at eventually told me, no, thanks, which, you know, it was great that it worked out that way because it would have been real bad to have spent, you know, a couple thousand on application fees to find out I got in somewhere. But yeah, so I think, you know, does that answer the question?
Yes. So you actually applied like, I guess immediately after the like back-to-back cycles. Is that what you're saying? Because that can
Correct.
be a quick turnaround decision. I mean, for those listening, I believe AMCAS just opened on the 3rd and you can start submitting on March or on May 31st. So, you know, if you're holding those wait lists, I guess, yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think about like, do you take a gap year or do you just go in and decide to apply this next cycle immediately? Like,
So I didn't take the MCAT until after I graduated college because I wanted to have like a dedicated time to study for the MCAT rather than balancing with my coursework and whatnot. And so by the time I took the MCAT, it was too late to apply that cycle. So I applied the very next cycle. So my original plan coming out of college was to have 2 gap years, but because my first cycle was unsuccessful, I decided to I reapplied immediately because, you know, I already had 2 gap years. Reapplying then would have given me 3 gap years, and I didn't really feel that I should take, you know, more than 3 gap years.
yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? I think it's a super personal decision. Anna, you want to say something?
Definitely. I for a while I was thinking to myself, you know, all these med school admissions committees have rejected me. You know, they must know something that I don't. Is this really the path for me? Do I need to do something else? So yeah, it was a lot to think about. I think it really is a personal decision.
Yeah, just like thinking about that quick turnaround, I think it's important that, you know, if you're not ready to reapply, like don't rush into it. Like it's not worth spending another cycle. Like we'll probably talk about that in the preparing to reapply section of this talk. But if you're not ready to reapply, then you shouldn't. Like if you have been preparing and you're ready to jump right into that second cycle, then like by all means go for it. But if you're not ready and you haven't significantly changed your application or, you know, thought about your weaknesses or why you might not have gotten in, then it's like probably not a good idea to spend all this money. Again, be a reapplicant just to have the same outcome. So there's like no harm in taking another year. Like there's people of all ages in our med school classes that are doing absolutely wonderfully. And it really matters less than you think. Once you're kind of, I don't know, at least I feel that way kind of in my later med school years that I don't know how old anyone is. I don't really care how old anyone is. Like, it just doesn't matter that much. Like, I think it's cooler when people have had like cool experiences before med school, because it's something interesting to talk about. It's another neat experience. So it may seem like, oh my gosh, like that's a whole nother year, but it's like, in the grand scheme of things, it's a year is not that much. 2 years is not that much. Like, your residency is going to be, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years already. And it's, people tack on extra years, like it's extra change. So yeah, it's a year. So do it right.
All right, thank you all. That was great. We'll just now move to the rejection part of the talk. So now we're in the scenario where, let's say you've been rejected from, well, let's start with just being rejected from all medical schools. And, maybe you weren't expecting this and the wait list didn't pan out. How did you guys, if you experienced that, I think we were all rejected from at least one medical school, right? How do you experience that or deal with that disappointment, and kind of who did you lean on, or what kind of coping strategies did you rely on to keep your mental health okay during that time? Because it's really, really tough.
For me, it was kind of tough because I applied one cycle and I got in, but I got rejected from one of the schools that I was actually really, really interested in, and had spent close to 7 years doing research with. So I had that that idea that if I've devoted this much time doing research at this institution, it definitely might maybe increase the chances of getting in. And when I got the rejection post-secondary, it wasn't even, I don't think I even got an interview for that school. It definitely hit hard. But I think it was just talking to mentors, talking to those around me, and realizing that, look, honestly, it's not a matter of them not liking me or them thinking that I'm not good enough for the program. It's just that it wasn't a good fit for them and for me. And I'm, looking back, I'm actually happy that I'm here at UCLA and that program didn't work out. I mean, it's a great program. I have nothing against it, but if anything, it worked out better this way. I think in the moment we can get really caught up in like, oh, it has something to do with them not liking me. My application is not perfect. There's something wrong about me. But I think it more so is just that programs have certain likings, and it's okay to not fit that liking. Yeah.
I think I'll chime in a little on this one. Yeah, I definitely was waiting for a while for even any interviews, like until pretty late in the process. So I had plenty of rejections before I had any interview, and I was getting a little worried, like, so I can kind of understand that feeling of like, you start to doubt yourself, there's just like a lot going on. There's a lot of pressure. And it definitely is a lot to deal with. And so I think talking with your mentors is a really, really important thing. Keeping in touch with them, keeping them updated as to what's going on. Oftentimes these are people that have maybe been through this process before or done something similar, so they definitely always have good insight. But I also think like remembering that you are so much more than like a student and a med student. I think that's something we as like med students even forget as well. It's like there's so much more in your life. There's so many like interests you have outside of that. And in a time when you're kind of powerless, like you're just waiting, you don't really have anything, you can't do a whole lot. As much as you can, kind of try to enjoy like some of those other things that you maybe didn't have the time to enjoy while going through your application process or studying for MCATs or whatnot. And things that you may not be able to enjoy even as you look forward and get into med school eventually. And so I think for me, I actually went through this, kind of in the height of the COVID like pandemic. Like I was actually stuck across the country from my family. It was kind of a crazy situation where I was also working a ton, kind of stuck in a lab. And so for me, just like doing things I like. So for me, I like running a lot. So I'd get outside and go running and just kind of try to do those things that that you already know make you happy. And that's really key to just keep your mental health good in those situations. And yeah, definitely do talk to people. Like, I think that's really important, is to just keep people updated, talk to your mentors. They always have good advice, and also know you well. So, they'll be able to kind of guide you in that situation.
Yeah, I completely agree, Bennett. I think it's so, so important to stay connected, and like not only with your mentors, but also with like your friends and family, and just like making that space to like vent and like let it out, you know, is so important and like therapeutic when you're just like, everything's terrible. I got rejected again from another school I really loved and expected, you know, different results at, and it will happen to you. If you are applying to med school, you will get rejected from a school you really like. All of us were rejected probably from many schools we really liked, and that's just the nature of the process. So I think it's important to remind yourself too that honestly, like so much of this process like comes down to luck and who happens to read your application. And you know, there are amazing students that slip through the cracks every single year that have, you know, great experiences and would make like a really fantastic doctor, and just for whatever reason don't get picked up by different schools. And so, you know, just keeping in mind that like this process is bigger than just you as a student, and you matter so much more than, you know, just someone flipping through 100 applications a day. It's easy to skip over someone. And so, you know, if this is like something you're dedicated to, then like, you know, start thinking about reapplying, start reevaluating, and get back to it. Because if like this is your dream, then keep chasing. It's another year, you know, there's always another year. So yeah, try not to get too discouraged. I think we've all felt those moments of like feeling very discouraged and like, oh my gosh, what did I work so hard for? But just know that we've all been through it. And, you know, if you keep at it, I think there's like a really good chance you can get in the next cycle reapplying, and we'll talk about kind of how to optimize your chances for that too.
A follow-up question, and then maybe we can hear from Norman. You know, is it okay to reach out to med schools for feedback if you're rejected? And has anyone done that or have experience? Maybe not the med school directly, or like, you know, someone else to say, hey, what did I do? You know, most of the time it's not even you. It's very subjective, and it's more about, you know, their limited spots and whoever read your application. But can you ask med schools for feedback?
I'm happy to take this question. So some schools that you apply to will say, you know, like if you did not get it anywhere, email us and we'll give you like sort of post-rejection counseling. Only one of the, so my first time that I applied, only one of the schools that I applied to was like willing to do it. So I emailed them to ask for it. And just to give you a timeline, this was probably March of sort of the tail end of my first cycle, and about 2 months before the start of the next cycle. And they said, yeah, you know, your request has been received. We'll email you when your advisement is ready. And so this was March 2020. I emailed them again May 2020 to follow up, say, you know, hey, like I'm about to reapply. Like it would be really great if I could have this, you know, this advisement so I could use it for my reapplication. And they said, yeah, we'll get it to you real soon. It's now May 2022. I still haven't gotten it. So I'm not holding out for it any longer. So, you know, I did sort of pay for like an application advisor, you know, which is sort of helpful, although I have a suspicion that probably my letters of recommendation played a role as well, which I, you know, obviously can't know about those. But then I also actually reached out to someone at a medical school, which may be the medical school I attend now, which doesn't officially offer rejection counseling, but this person was able to meet with me and sort of help me understand what sorts of things I should change for my reapplications. I think even if they don't officially, like the medical school itself doesn't offer like admission advising, you can always reach out to somebody who's like on the admissions committee one-on-one and see if they'd be willing to talk to you. I hope that
Thank
answers the
you.
question.
Yes, that's so helpful. And someone just posed a question in the chat, which I want to quickly address. Can you reapply to a school that you're rejected from? And, you know, is there anything you should add in your application? I don't know. When you reapply.
So I have framed, I'm kidding, I don't actually have it framed. I have a rejection letter from UCLA signed by Dr. Braddock, because he was the interim dean of admissions for that 1 year. And so, and then the second year I applied, I have like the acceptance letter. He's no longer the interim dean, so I was like, maybe that had something to do with it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, you can totally reapply, and some schools have a strict policy about how many times you can reapply. But as long as you just follow the rule, and you have to change something about your application. Don't resubmit the same thing. But obviously, your GPA is probably not going to change much, especially if you're out of college. Your MCAT's not going to change unless you retake the MCAT. So it's really all about the essays and like the letters of recommendation, and really, all those things together sort of tell a story about you. And so you might not change individual components all that much. It's all more about changing like the perspective and sort of the ratios to sort of create a different story of you.
That's a good way to put it. Yes, just like kind of changing the piece, the puzzle, the end puzzle. Like the pieces are the same, but you got to change like what it looks like in the end. Okay, cool. That's perfect. Because next we want to talk about, okay, now you've decided to reapply to med school. How do you guys identify areas of improvement in your application? Like if you had to reapply, or if you did reapply, where would you look in your application, and what factors would you consider making adjustments to?
I can hop in here. So first thing I want to just like address really quickly is like the use of application consultants or like consulting services for med school apps. And just so everyone watching this recording knows, we do offer free peer advising with medical students. Oftentimes the people working for consulting companies are medical students, and there may or may not be students that do both this free peer advising and very expensive paid consulting advising. So just, I'm not saying anything, but keep that in mind. So, there's definitely ways to get really good quality feedback, like without spending a lot of money, if that's like not something that you have available to you. Just wanted to make sure everyone knows that. But in terms of kind of identifying areas of weakness, I really love how Norman was talking about like the piece of the puzzle in your application, because oftentimes if you go on websites like Reddit and you'll see people saying like, oh, these are all my stats, these are all my hours, like, why didn't I get in? Like, how should I change things to reapply? And you'll see in the comments, everyone's like, oh, you need like 30 more hours of shadowing, and you need more clinical volunteering hours. And it's, I think it's like a very narrow-minded approach to think about it in terms of like these individual pieces of your application. Like, yes, if you're weak in one specific area, that's a good thing to try to address, but also like keep in mind your application as a whole, like how that whole puzzle fits together. Like, you can have thousands of hours in each of those separate categories, but if the schools don't believe that you have like a mission or like a passion for medicine where you see yourself fitting within the medical field, then there's, they don't really see that connection there, and like why you really want to be a doctor and why you want to go down this path, because it's long and it's hard and it's not for everyone. And so you need to really show kind of almost like, you don't need to connect everything that you're doing, but a cohesiveness in your application that just like shows you pointing towards this, this mission. What is your goal? Like, why are you doing this? And so I think that's a really important point to stress.
If I can just add on to that, I mean, I really love that perspective. And I also like the perspective of that Norman mentioned earlier with regards to like reshuffling kind of personal statements, and like, as you think about kind of things that you can improve on with regards to reapplying. I think another thing is like, thinking about like what is coming across through your statements. I think it's one thing to have a really polished essay. It's another thing to have it really be you. I think sometimes you lose yourself in that process and it just ends up becoming like a perfect mush of just not you. I think in that scenario, it's good to have people that know you well kind of read through those essays, like family members, close friends, because they'll tell you how genuine those essays are and how much they reflect who you are as a person. Because, you know, if you're passionate about medicine, you know, you guys have come this far, and you're in it for the right reasons, then, you know, that really needs to come across. That genuineness needs to come across. And I love the idea of kind of having this common thread, this cohesiveness in your story. But I think when you approach it, just be careful not to have it overly polished and perfect, or even kind of writing the essay to kind of appease or you know, wanting to fulfill certain things the admission officers are looking for. I think again, there's a lot of beauty in imperfection and a lot of beauty in our growth as individuals. I don't think they're looking for finished products and they're not looking for perfect individuals. So just being mindful of that when you're writing your essays or thinking about rewriting your essays. Yeah.
I think to add a little bit, especially if you're reapplying, depending on if it's a year or if it's 2 years, and I feel like oftentimes it's going to be probably more likely 2 years, just kind of how it goes. You'd be surprised how much can change in 2 years and how much your like story and how much how you view kind of things you did in undergraduate work or how that's connected to what you're doing, you know, in those 2 gap years. And so I think like I think everybody's kind of mentioned it, but really telling that story, like explain, you know, like make sure there's some way in there, like, you know, hey, this was my, you know, this is what I wanted to do when I first applied. And, you know, now I like really fell in love with this research, or like, you know, I did this, you know, service opportunity completely changed my whole view. And here's how I see things differently. Like, you know, those are other things you can definitely kind of talk about. I wouldn't make them the entire focus, like don't change your app all 100%, but I think just be genuine in that, like, you know, just be honest that like, hey, things have changed and, you know, I see things differently now and kind of this is what's going on. Yeah.
Norman, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I agree with what everyone has said. I think it's important to sort of just look at the bigger picture, so that, you know, when the person reads your application, it's not, you know, oh, this is somebody who, you know, does cancer research and works in like an old folks home, you know, but rather shows a story like this is somebody who's like really, you know, ingrained in their community, who volunteers at, you know, their local church, and who, you know, delivers groceries to the to the handicapped in their neighborhood, you know, who fundraises for the neighborhood. You know, they want to see that you're that it's not just a bunch of like ill-fitting pieces, but that they, you know, fit together.
I love that point that you're making. And just to like build on that, you don't like, I think some people hear this and they're like, oh, but you know, I do lots of different things. And I felt like that, like I worked at a summer camp and I like did research with spiders in evolutionary biology. And like, I went to Alabama and worked for a community health nonprofit. So I like, my activities were like literally all over the board. I was a campus tour guide. Like I did like the most non-medical things that you could think of, along with medical things too. But it, you know, I think finding your common thread is more about like finding like, why were you passionate about those activities? And if you're choosing activities that you are truly passionate about, then there is a common thread there. And I like found that mine was like education and teaching and, you know, supporting both like kids and like patients through, you know, their like classroom studies or like their health, and using like education as a way to deliver that. And that ended up being my common thread, even though my activities, like many of them had nothing to do with education, but that's like a I don't know, a type of thing that you can do in like any activity. So just if you're looking for a common thread, like think a little more broadly, like it doesn't have to be like heart disease. I do research on heart disease. I work with heart disease patients. I do all heart disease things. Like, think a little more broadly, and you can still find that connection that like drives you as a person, as a applicant, and like really shows like your passion throughout all of these different, like seemingly like very opposite activities, but really shows that like you do have kind of this central common goal.
And I want to add to that a little bit, in that not every single activity you do needs to make it into your personal statement. I think, like, honestly, for me, the thing that I spent the most amount of time on undergrad was not even mentioned in my application. I was a college athlete, and so I was like, I honestly don't really think this is relevant to why I want to do medicine, so I'm not going to mention it. Like, it's there on my activities list, right? They'll see it, but like, it doesn't say anything. It doesn't help like me explain why I want to be a doctor. And so I think and I revised my essay like 5 times because I was trying to fit it in and trying to fit it in and trying to fit it in. And just like at the end, I was like, nah, this isn't it. And so I think another kind of piece is just really like reflecting on, if there's something that you did and, you've just like had fun with it or it's part of you, but you don't really think it informed kind of why you want to do medicine, then that's something that probably doesn't need to make it into your personal statement. So really like not trying to force everything in there. Like, it's better to have a few things, I think, and talk about them in a really deep kind of meaningful way than it is to like relist all of your activities or all those other things in your essays, especially when reapplying.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And like one last point that I feel like comes up a lot is people think that they can't mention like future activities or something that they just started in their personal statement. That's a misconception. You absolutely can. I like was starting on my year in Alabama, and I wrote like a whole paragraph in my personal statement about why I was going and what I was going to be doing there, and like how my previous activities had like pushed me towards this opportunity. And I got asked about it in literally every single interview. It was a huge part of my application, even though I was like 5 days in when I submitted my primary application. But, I just wrote about like my goals and why I was doing this. And then in my secondaries, I could expand on like what I was actually doing. But that is totally fair game. Like, don't feel like you can't mention something just because you're just starting it.
And if I can just make a quick point, I love that. And another thing is, if you do decide to mention it in your statement, be prepared to talk about it, because it's definitely going to come up during interviews. Yeah, just be mindful that it should be something you're passionate about. It's something you're willing to talk about at length. Yeah, but I completely agree.
I do want to also add, though, that you should be prepared to talk about anything on your application, even if it's something you did not expect whatsoever. Like, I remember distinctly at a school that I got into but didn't end up attending for their MD PhD program. I knew all my activities, I knew all my essays, like I knew my application cover to cover. And then I get into like the Zoom room interview, and the faculty he's like, I read your application and I saw your transcript and I saw you took a class on like history of rock music. What's the best rock band of the 20th century? I was like, how do I even answer this? So yeah, I think part of the interview process is really seeing how well you are at like reacting to things like on your feet, like being on your feet, on your toes.
Yes, and I think that's an important thing too when you're reflecting on the reapplication process. I mean, where do you think personally, like it's very, very personal, where can you improve? Is it were your essays your weak spot? Were your interviews your weak spot? I mean, there's some people that write really wonderful essays, and then when it comes to the interview, it falls flat. And so really try to work on your weaknesses. Try to identify them, or ask people to read over your application again and provide advice. And then remember too, there's a lot of things that are just completely out of your control. your letter writers, maybe it's time to think about finding a different letter writer, or even your school list. Perhaps this application cycle you applied to like a really narrow list of schools, and maybe it's better if you kind of broaden that and have a better range of med schools. I mean, unfortunately, there's no safety schools in medical school. It's really hard to get into everyone, but try to maximize your chances. Apply to all of the schools in your state. That's typically a piece of advice that people say. And yeah, apply broadly. It is a very expensive process, and we recognize that. And that's also a part of the disappointment with being rejected, because you have to pay the money again. So just be very sure that you're ready when you want to apply the next time around. And like Anna said at the beginning, don't rush into it if you don't feel ready. Everyone gets to med school at their own time, and it really doesn't matter, like, in the end. So it's disappointing now, but hang in there. And I guess one more piece of encouragement I want to say regarding the reapplication is just, it might feel like, you're going back to the drawing board, but what we have to remember is you're not starting from a blank slate. Like, you've already done all of this introspection, and you've already written all these essays and reflected on why you want to be a doctor. Maybe you even got the chance to interview and meet other med students and med school applicants that kind of reminded you of why you want to do this. And so I think a lot of people think there's a stigma around reapplying to med school, similar to retaking the MCAT, but we want you guys to know that, like, it's okay. Like, it doesn't really matter how many times you apply or retake the MCAT. You'll get there eventually. And sometimes it can even be to your benefit, because then they know, okay, this person's really sure, like, they really know they want to be a doctor because they've applied twice. So just kind of try to flip it on the positive when you're feeling down, and yeah, keep your head up. But we will move into the Q&A portion. I see some movement in the chat, but if you guys have any questions here, please just pose them in the Q&A so we can see them easily. And we'll do that for the next couple of minutes.
Just looking at one of the questions here about asking about new letters of rec and how would you approach asking professors from undergrad if it's already been 1+ years since you took their class. If you're reapplying, odds are that you're either asking, well, it's a little bit different if you're asking the same professor again, or if you're asking like a different professor. In my case, I had asked a couple of professors and then kind of decided actually last minute not to apply that cycle, like very last minute. And so, but I kind of kept them up to date. So I think it's very important to keep your letter writers like up to date on what you're doing and what's going on. Even if they're not like super responsive to you, just like sending them an email saying, hey, here's the update, here's like what's going on, here's my plan. And if you're in that boat where you're not sure if you're going to do or a gap year or whatever else, like you can definitely tell them then, like, my plan is to reapply in 2 years. I, may ask you for a letter again if you're asking the same professor. If you're asking a professor you haven't asked before, I don't think it's a different than asking the first time. Like there's not a whole lot different there, but some special considerations if you're asking the same professor again. And if you keep them updated on things that you've done in your gap year or years, there's a chance that professor may, update the letter or that kind of thing. So it can only help you really to stay in touch with them. Also acknowledging that it's sometimes a little weird to try to stay in contact with your college professors because like you don't know them super well. So just do it, try to. I know it might be awkward, but it'll definitely help.
Great. And while we're waiting for more questions, someone posed a question in the RSVP form. How do you deal with imposter syndrome? I think this is very relevant to today's talk, but we've all felt it in med school.
And still feel it. I think a couple of things. I mean, I can't speak for it, but I still continually feel it on a daily basis. I think one thing that's helped over the years is realizing that, I'm here for a reason. We're all here for a reason. they chose us, we got into med school and they accepted us. So they probably saw something somewhere in there that remotely said that I would probably survive. But I think it's, what's helped is realizing that, look, P equals MD. They keep on saying it, as long as you pass classes, as long as you focus and, stay true to yourself, and realize that, look, your self-worth is more than whether or not you get into med school. Your character, your self-worth is more than all these stuff that come and go. It's more so like being comfortable in your skin and knowing that, look, at the end of the day, I'm passionate about this. And sooner or later it'll work out. It'll take time, sure, but I think, all good things take time. So I think just being mindful of that and knowing that, look, it's a long haul. We're in it for the long haul. And a lot of the professors that we're seeing on a daily basis, they were in our shoes at one point, and they were also struggling. So I think being mindful of those things has helped definitely. But also realizing that everyone's going through it. The guy sitting next to you across from you is also going through imposter syndrome. So just being mindful of that.
So what I found really helpful for me, there was I can't remember if he was like a professor or an industry researcher or something like that, but he basically put out what he called like a CV of failures. And he basically said, we all sort of see each other's CVs and see all the awards and grants and papers that we've all done, but he's like, you don't see all the rejections, all the failed grants, submissions, things like that. And so he made this like CV of his own personal failures. And he listed out like all the PhD programs he applied to got rejected from, all the papers he submitted got rejected, all the grants he submitted that got rejected, all the faculty positions he gave job talks for, all the awards he applied for that he got rejected from. And I sort of think it was helpful for me to know that failure is just a part of the journey, and so these setbacks that that we all face, I think, are not to be should be taken seriously, but shouldn't affect you to your core. You just kind of have to like brush it off and keep going, because that's the only way. Otherwise you just get bogged down with like the negativity.
That was the best. Thank you for that pep talk. Okay, we got another question. How do you approach fielding job interviews for your next potential gap years if you're still on a wait list with no acceptances? Any advice for that?
I can't exactly talk to being on a wait list, but I was in a situation where I was applying to gap year positions and also preparing an application at the same time, just because I was at a point in my life where I really did not know exactly what I wanted to do. And for other reasons, like wasn't sure that it was really the right time for me to apply to med school. And that was actually one of the reasons why I ended up waiting 2 years. But it is kind of a delicate dance to play in terms of like doing job interviews, different places, and then, like telling people, like I'm thinking about applying to med school or that kind of thing. And I think it is definitely best to be honest with people, and just kind of let them know, like, here's my thinking, here's my plan, like, here's why I'm interested in this position, and just kind of like keeping people updated. And I think a lot of times, especially if you're applying to anything medically related, research, whatever else, a lot of these positions are pretty used to having people like apply who are in these positions. So they've kind of seen that before. So you're not going to like totally scare them off by saying these things. And yeah, I think it also like it can be hard when you're like, half of you is like, oh, I want to go to apply to med school and do that, and half of you is like, this job is really cool, I'm kind of interested in it, to like really truly like give your full self to that job interview or whatnot. And like I've definitely felt that, where I was like, felt like I was half in, half out kind of thing. And I can imagine if you're on a wait list, it's probably even more difficult. And so I think like really just trying, like when you have those job interviews or whatnot, of like generally trying to be interested in them, and kind of like do that while still being honest. I think it's a really hard thing to balance. But yeah, just a few thoughts there.
Another question we had before this session was, this is someone looking way ahead, trying to plan, all the perfect little moments, going into the med school application. Should you have backup plans ready, or is it something where you just kind of go in full force and then hope it works and then deal with it if it doesn't?
Are you okay? That's a good question. Personally, I would say like the application cycle takes a full year. It is long, like over a year. And so if you apply in, May, you write your secondaries in June and July, maybe a little bit in August. There's a lot of them. And then you do nothing afterwards. I think it honestly, like during your interviews, they're going to be asking like what you're up to right now. And so I think it's a good idea to like continue doing what you're already doing, or be doing something during that year that is meaningful to you. So not necessarily planning 2 years in advance, like, okay, I'm going to be doing something for 2 years, but doing something during your application cycle, because you'll have then like things to talk about in your secondaries, that's new, things to talk about in your interviews, that's new. If you are on a wait list or you're sending a thank you letter or a letter of interest, you'll have interesting things to write about. You're like, hey, I'm still super interested in your program. I've been, improving my research experience over the last year, and I have this publication that I'm gonna, submit or is accepted or whatever, or I'm doing a poster presentation. Like, you can use those activities that you're doing as kind of significant updates to schools to kind of talk about in those letters. So I think it is a good idea to do things during your application year, but I wouldn't say you have to plan 2 years in advance. That's a lot of planning. That's a lot.
And I mean, maybe you can set yourself up, like if you are doing gap years, for example, already during your application, maybe it's a job like a lab tech that you could, in theory, extend for another year if you were not accepted, which is a nice backup plan already. Maybe just thinking about those things if you want to really, really be comfortable and extra sure. But I went straight through into the application process. So really, I didn't have a plan B. I was just really hoping for the best. And then I thought, okay, if this doesn't work, like I'll kind of go and address that from there. It was already just such a intense process where it took all of my attention that I couldn't even think about trying to apply to other things, or, while I was in my senior year of college interviewing for med school, was like too much. So I figured, okay, worst case scenario, like I work at Wendy's and then I find, it's like I couldn't think about applying to post-bac programs or something at the same time. But, I guess some people do it. But then it's hard because hopefully you get in and then you have to say no to those things. And that's probably the best case scenario.
I honestly forgot that people go straight through. I know you did, Julia. I'm like so used to thinking that I didn't, that of course everyone does that, but that's a really good point. Being in school definitely counts. I do think though, like if it's like December or January or February and you have no interviews and nothing's happening yet, and you're starting to think, maybe it's a possibility I will have to reapply, then like that's the point where you should start thinking about like, okay, what am I going to do over the next year? Like start thinking about the weaknesses in your application, start reaching out to your mentors for feedback, start like making connections with med students to ask what you can do better, and like what is lacking. And then you can start planning, because some of those summer jobs are going to be, or like those jobs for the next year are going to be doing applications at that time, December, January, February. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind. But yeah.
But I completely agree. And then also just being mindful that not to get scared off if you don't get interviews by December, because for example, I interviewed December, January, and thank God got in. But I think like again, just being patient with the system, but at the same time, kind of having that in the back of your mind of, okay, what is plan B if this doesn't work out? That way, come March, April, May, you don't think of, okay, what do I do now? You've kind of thought about that ahead of time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree. And especially if you want to do like back-to-back application cycles, something to think about.
Yeah, I sort of, just to sort of piggyback off of what George said, so I was often told, and some of you may hear about it, it's called like the boo rule. So like if you don't have any interview invitations by Halloween, like you should strongly start to think about the fact that you might not be getting any that cycle, and sort of getting ready to reapply if that's something you want to do. Because like if you're going to do like a summer fellowship or really anything else like that, like some of these jobs, they start their hiring processes, in February and March. And so if med school is not going to be an option for you, and you want to go for one of these like in industry jobs for your gap year, you have to get that application ready as well. And so you don't want to be caught, trying to do that in like the last minute. So again, it's obviously not a hard and fast. George mentioned he got interviews in December and January. I got my last interview invite in January, but that's like the vast majority did come obviously before Halloween.
Just want to also add that like if you do hold out and you're like later into the spring, not all hope is lost for you to do something the next year. I was in a position where I decided like literally mid-spring that I wasn't going to apply that cycle, and I was then graduating in like 2 months and wanted to do research and get a job and whatnot, and was managed to be able to do all that. I think one of the nice things is if you've like prepared materials for applying to med school, you've probably done most of the work for doing a job application, or more than you probably would for a job application. So you have a lot of materials ready, and so I think not all hope is lost. Like there are still places that are hiring. There's plenty of, especially academic research, lots of things are available. But yeah, I mean, obviously if you plan ahead a little more, you can really kind of like choose what you really want to do, but there are always opportunities to get involved with stuff.
All right, great. Let's see. Got one last question. We only have 3 minutes. We will address that question in the chat. And yeah, let's let you guys get back for those who have exams this week. Thank you all to our panelists, and thank you to everyone attending this session. You got this in your application cycle. We just want to push the positivity. And yes, please sign up to have a one-on-one session with med students. We are a free resource and can really help you answer your questions that you have, because it is such a personal journey, and everyone's different. So thank you all. Have a good night.